Canada's most important new writers, Kate Harris and Cedar Bowers. We're going to talk about their books, of course, but both of them, as I said before, will also have solo sessions later in the festival. The real idea tonight is to let you know them better as writers, and if you know anything about them already, you know that both of them have received much critical praise. You know, we're a little bit behind in the sense that this is the first one we've had in 3 years, so their books have been out for a couple of years. Cedar's novel, entitled Astra, of which we have many copies over there if you haven't had it, was nominated for the Giller Prize and shortlisted for the Giller in 2021, which is not bad for your first time out. It's her first novel. And Kate Harris's nonfiction, Land of Lost Borders, was a national bestseller and won the Taylor Prize for the best Canadian work of nonfiction in 2019. I'm given to hyperbole, but when I say they're two of our most important new writers in Canada, I'm not exaggerating. Cedar spends her time between Galiano Island, which you probably know is a lot like Denman, about 100 miles south of here, where she grew up, and the rest of the time she's in Victoria. She lives with her partner, Michael Christie, who you might have already met, because he's already spoken to us today. He's another important Victoria writer. Kate grew up in southern Ontario, but now lives right beside my cousin Linda in Atlanta, we just discovered, off-grid in that beautiful little town in the far, far northwest of British Columbia, with her partner, Kate Neville. I'm going to give you just a brief summary of each book for those of you who haven't read them, and then we're going to talk about them in different ways for the rest of the night. Astra, Cedar's book, is a collage, and she'll correct me as necessary as the night goes on, but it's a collage of stories, all of which involve this woman named Astra in one way or another. The stories follow Astra from even before her birth, just before her birth, to her late middle age, from 10 different angles. There's stories in which she is not first person, she's a third person character in each of these, but from very different angles, different characters in her life, at 10 different stages in her life. And it's an amazingly, emotionally, for me, and it was emotionally charged portrait of this woman. And really quite you can see why she was nominated for the Giller. It's a tour de force of fiction. Land of Lost Borders, in the very shortest version, it is a travel memoir about a grueling group, plural, 2 bicycle journeys across Central Asia. But that's really just the short version. It's way, way more than that, way more than your average travel memoir. It's really a coming-of-age tale kind of wrapped up in a voyage of discovery. And it takes you over roads and terrain and through weather that I venture virtually none of us will have or will experience, let alone ride a bicycle through. That's what blew me. I have ridden bicycles a lot in the past, but I would never, ever, ever ride a bicycle in the places I can't go with a bicycle.
It's well advised.
Yeah, thank you. There's an awful lot more to each book, and we're going to talk more about them, explore them tonight. What really stunned me about both books was the scale of what they've accomplished. Cedar, this rich, poignant portrait of a woman's life from all those different angles over 50-odd years, and Kate's equally rich and always really very engaging, especially if you think about the kind of nonfiction that I, for example, write. Very engaging and often gripping tale of this epic journey that you're not going to do. No one else is going to do it. Even she will promise you. And at least that's how I related to them. But before I blab on anymore, they're both going to read short excerpts, each going to read short excerpts, 5 minutes or so from their books. Again, I remind you, the real goal here of the evening, their excerpts and the rest of it, is to pique your interest. We're not going to have much of an opportunity for dialogue, but you will have that at each of their respective solo sessions over the next couple of days. After they've read their little excerpts, now we're going to discuss different dimensions of what they did and why they did and how they did it. And I think you're going to go first.
Kicking off.
Thank you.
All right. So my book is about a long bike ride on the Silk Road, but it's about a whole bunch of other things, which some people like. Some people are like, just cut to the biking. What are the pandas? Or no. But basically, when I was a little kid, I wanted to be an explorer, a very like capital R romantic swashbuckling explorer when I grew up. Not the colonizing type, although it's historically hard to distinguish those. But I looked around and the world looked pretty mapped and tamed from small town Ontario, and I sort of set my sights on Mars, like that was going to be my realm for exploration. And I took it really seriously, like this was a galvanizing force in my life. But anyway, after studying science and realizing that exploring other worlds, so far anyway, involves a lot of like laboratory work in this one and time cooped up, I realized I wasn't really spiritually suited to that kind of exploration, and instead I decided to bike the Silk Road instead of going to Mars. And particularly, I'll read you a passage about biking across Uzbekistan, which is a very Mars-like place in a lot of ways. So it'll draw some of those parallels. I thought I spotted the red planet when we set off biking after dusk, a bright ember on the horizon like the lit end of a cigarette. Mars, if it was Mars, looked so tiny I could redact the entire world with my pinky finger, the way Neil Armstrong said he could blot out the Earth from the moon with his thumb. Did that make you feel really big? Someone asked him upon his return. No, the first moonwalker confessed in a rare, candid moment. It made me feel really, really small. Uzbekistan had a similar effect on me, especially after the sun went down. In that world suddenly cooled, no speed seemed impossible, no destination too far-fetched. The desert was so flat the constellations came right down to Earth, and stars hovered around me at eye level, so it seemed like I was traveling to them, even through them. With every pedal stroke, I was soaring closer to Saturn's rings. I was surging past the heliopause. I was flying neck and neck with the Voyager spacecrafts as they sped towards Sirius, a sun just 8.6 light years from our own. Tellingly, I could never muster as much interest in the Voyager's scientific mission as in their more whimsical cargo. Mounted on the instrument bay of each probe is a golden record, a 12-inch gold-plated copper phonograph inscribed with earthly greetings in 55 tongues, snapshots from around the world, and a medley of natural sounds and human music, whale song, waves breaking on a shore, the heartbeats of a woman in love, pictures of Oxford spires and towers, and of a modern airplane taking flight. The biologist Lewis Thomas suggested including the complete works of Bach, but that, he said, would be boasting. So they settled on just 3 of Bach's compositions, as well as the first 2 bars of Beethoven's Cavatina, supposedly the only music that moved the deaf composer to tears. Also etched onto the record are recordings as diverse as Azeri bagpipes, a Navajo night chant, and a Morse code rendering of the Latin phrase ad astra per spera, through hardship to the stars. Such fragments present, to any extraterrestrial intelligence that might discover and decipher them, a partial survey, a kind of haiku summary of the unguessable gamut of life on Earth. The Golden Record, as far as I can recall, wasn't discussed in the grade school science class that introduced me to the Voyager spacecraft. The discs weren't science, after all, but something else, more like poetry, though I don't think they came up in my English classes either. Instead, I learned about the record early in university from a book by Carl Sagan called Murmurs of Earth, the Voyager Interstellar Record, which gave me shivers with its hope that, quote, like Marco Polo, the Golden Record will find itself at the gates of some ancient and great civilization. At that point, I was still smitten with Polo's Silk Road explorations, meaning still blissfully ignorant of their mercantile leanings. But if Polo fell in my esteem, Sagan remains an idol, an explorer equal parts scientist and poet. He led the team responsible for compiling the Golden Record, charged with making its selections fair in terms of geographic, ethnic, and cultural representation, while giving a comprehensive overview of life on Earth. In the process, Sagan slipped in some revealing humor. A picture from Sir Vivian Fuchs' 1958 Transantarctic expedition shows a snowcat, the love child of a monster truck and an army tank, which the team attempted to drive across Antarctica, tottering precariously over the edge of a massive crevasse. This is Sagan. Freeing stuck vehicles may be an experience we share with alien explorers, no matter how advanced, noted Sagan. He also included a photograph of someone climbing a jagged spire in the Alps. Quote, "If the recipients recognize the silhouetted human figure, they may guess it was both difficult and seemingly pointless to scale this rock needle. The only point will be the accomplishment of doing it. If this message is communicated, it will tell extraterrestrials something very important about us. Possibly that humans are not entirely rational, though we often try to pretend otherwise." The golden record itself is a seemingly irrational project. Why waste valuable payload space on a time capsule when it could be otherwise devoted to more fruitful scientific instruments? NASA even hesitated to take the, quote, pale blue dot photograph, for it required turning the spacecraft around, which was costly in terms of energy, and pointing a camera at the sun, which risked frying its optics. Such a photograph wasn't sensible, in other words. It was a frivolous use of taxpayer dollars. It wouldn't reveal anything novel or groundbreaking, given we already know, without a doubt, where our home planet is situated in the solar system and what it looks like. Science, sadly, has never been overly concerned with self-reflection. Only passionate lobbying by Carl Sagan managed to change NASA's mind about that photograph. What those administrators and engineers didn't seem to realize is that exploration is a systematic inquiry into the nature of things, but also a radical, revealing art, much like science itself. Though exploration might result in new territory conquered or a heightened mastery over the material world, its real value lies in how it expands our consciousness, our sense of connection with each other and the universe of which we're a part. Which means that seemingly impractical gestures, such as the pale blue dot photograph or the golden record itself, are not diversions from serious exploration, but its essence. What is the point of exploring if not to reveal our place in the wild scheme of things, or to send a vision of who we are out into the universe? A self-portrait and a message in a bottle. Maybe no other maps matter. During those night rides across Uzbekistan, I felt like a message in a bottle myself. I tried to make it out, but all I could read was the thin scroll of road lit by my headlamp. Something about potholes, about grass shooting up in the pavement cracks. Something about how there are places you can get to by road and places you can only get to by being on the road. A state of mind you can bring to almost any context, especially a highway paved in stars in Uzbekistan. At least until you're so sleepy, you nearly fall off your bike.
Uzbekistan. We'll come back to Uzbekistan in a moment.
Should I just go? Okay. Thank you, Howard, for your introductions, and Kate for that lovely reading. I'm going to be reading, as was said earlier, from Astra. You did a great job summarizing the book, so I don't need to do much, except for to say that Astra starts her life on a farming commune in northern British Columbia. And this first chapter that I'm going to read from is from her father Raymond's perspective. And she is not yet born, and he is very unsure about how he feels about fatherhood. And each chapter is named by the name of the person who's speaking, so this chapter is Raymond. Raymond Brine doesn't want to think about the coming baby. He doesn't want to think about it, or about Gloria, or his role in it all. He doesn't want to think about a creature so mewling and helpless, not about its cord, its first cry, or its delicate newborn skin. He doesn't want to think about shared blood, or familial lines, or humanity's relentless compulsion to overpopulate this weary planet either. What he wants to do is work, to toil away on celestial farms' lands with his comrades under this vast expanse of sky, to focus on soil, irrigation, crop yields, and building more housing for the commune. But this baby is coming as fast as a hurtling comet, and it's already made a mess of everything. Gloria arrived with the influx of spring workers in March, and after a long winter alone in the one-room fur cabin that he'd built his first winter at the farm, Raymond found himself drawn to her quick laugh and broad shoulders, so he let her spend a few nights in his bed. When it soon became clear that she was interested in more, he requested she move into the yurt with the others, carefully explaining he didn't believe in monogamous relationships, that he treasured his independence, and that he never planned on being tied down. Gloria cited this as the reason she kept the pregnancy from him until June, and why she announced the news publicly during a morning breakfast meeting rather than talking to him one-on-one. After the other women finished their congratulations, running their fingers over her small, taut belly and kissing her full cheeks, Raymond pulled her aside to explain yet again that he wasn't that kind of man. Not the kind who got married or provided or believed that A and B led to C. He wasn't going to move to the city, cut his hair, get a job in a bank or some other bullshit like that. He wasn't going to buy a house or a stroller, because on and on it would go. He'd been called to Celestial for a reason, and nothing was going to distract him or slow him down. If Gloria was hoping he'd build a family with her, or that she'd get a declaration of love, she'd set her sights on the wrong man. Despite Raymond's unwavering stance, Gloria stuck around Celestial all summer long. Sometimes she searched him out by the river or in the gardens, or she bravely knocked on his cabin door to show him a sweater she'd crocheted for the baby, or to update him on the kicks she felt at night. When he encountered her like this, both vulnerable and stubborn, Raymond looked anywhere but into her wide hazel eyes and pointed out that it would be better if she left and got her mother's help. He had no business getting involved with her child. Our child, Gloria reminded him firmly. If you say so, he said, closing the door. Summer turned to fall, yet even after most of the seasonal workers had returned to the city to luxuriate in the convenience of electric heat, Gloria showed no sign of going anywhere. So in October, long after her belly began protruding through her embroidered dresses, the hems riding up her thighs as the baby swelled, Raymond took further pains to avoid her. First, he removed his few belongings from his cabin and set up camp by the river. Then he stopped leading the morning meetings and hiking up the hill for the communal meals. Instead, he foraged kale, carrots, fennel, and zucchini from the gardens, and he grew even skinnier. In November, Doris, his childhood friend and the co-founder of Celestial, informed him that she and Gloria's friend Clodagh had moved Gloria into his cabin where it was warmer, and that even though everyone else had gone for the winter, the women were going to stay on until the baby arrived. They didn't want poor Gloria to be all alone. Though this bothered him, he was still confident that with time, Gloria would realize what a mistake she was making, so he soldiered on. He spent his nights on the slate rock riverbank, head resting on his rolled-up jacket, gazing up at the flickering light of the stars that scattered across the sky. And when the weather grew too cold for that, he began sleeping in the small hayloft in the animal shed with the nanny goats, holding out for the morning he'd wait to discover that the woman and her pregnant belly had finally gone. Or even better, he'd wake up to discover the whole fiasco had been a terrible dream.
Nice one. Thank you very much. So we, the committee, decided that a unifying theme of these two quite different on the surface of it, nonfiction and fiction books, was this theme of outsider. We've talked about this, you guys. Really, my question is, what do you think about it? We can our idea was that you made yourself an outsider across Asia there, deliberately, that you didn't discuss meeting the Uzbeks, but they found you quite different from most people they met. And similarly, Astra, once she's born and for the rest of her life, if we see her, is pretty much an outsider in the different, being born into that community that she left when she could, was also an outsider. So that was our kind of thesis, but I've also told you that I wonder, do you think that's valid to see both these stories of outsiders, or is it just a contrivance that we used? I think there's other things, more important things personally, that bring your books together. What do you think about this l'étranger?
Well, this is one of the neat things with putting a book in the world. As Anash said, people take all kinds of things from it that maybe you weren't emphasizing necessarily, but speak to someone as they read your book. But I definitely think, certainly in my book, I was an absolute outsider in all the places we traveled through. And in some ways, I've always felt like one. I felt like a Martian most of my life, in some respect, and just trying to get home. So I think that's definitely a theme. You know, anyone who's interested in aliens on any level probably feels some sense of alienation, or
And I think I wrote about people who want to be outsiders. But when I was thinking about this theme, I don't know if that's me. So the books maybe have similar themes, but I don't necessarily share the same similarity because I would never go on that bike trip.
not from Mars.
I'm also super scared of, scuba diving even. I would never do that, so I'm never going, in a spaceship. So, but I do find it interesting people who want to be outside of something, so their community or how they grew up or the city, and often I think that takes a lot of work. So the amount of work that you went through taking this trip, I just was worried about your caloric intake, and I was like hungry and very tired. And when I was writing about these people who started this commune, Raymond, and especially the women who worked there, even the stuff that didn't make it into the book or was cut, it was a lot about just grueling work and deciding to take on these big grueling projects. Fascinates me, but I haven't done it myself.
So it is, in a sense, it is valid. Different takes on it. One exploring being an outsider, one exploring outsiders from outside. So it was good. But enough about outsiders, because I want to get to some of the other things. That, to me, what I found they had in common is and again, I'm putting this to you so you can deal with it and contradict me as necessary and take it from there. But it's like they both depict epic journeys. Yours across Asia, across Central Asia in particular, and yours across a woman's lifetime. To me, that it really was an epic story when you put it all together. It's an amazing thing. And your rides, plural, were also amazing journeys. To me, that's something that. But do you think that's a fair comment in that sense? They kind of share this epic journey dimension of a sort?
Well, I kind of feel like all literature, this is my bias, of course, all literature is to some degree travel literature. You're entering another world, another consciousness, and in Astra's case, you're seeing her from through all these different eyes. And I don't know, that's partly what I love about traveling is being able to you're always a tourist on some level. You can't presume to really know, as none of those people presume to know Astra. They think they do, but she's ultimately unknowable. As are we, as is Uzbekistan, absolutely is unknowable. So that's be how I would see a link between our two.
Yeah, and I think I read for the reason you take bike trips, maybe, to explore, is I maybe am lazy or not daring enough, or I don't know, but you can read and travel while reading into people's minds and into their relationships. And I mean, that's one of the things I love most is you can never know that many people in your life all that well, or that many places all that well, but you can have these beautiful shortcuts from these other people who have experienced, who had different experiences or been on different trips, and you get to kind of piggyback or get to have that emotional experience. So I totally think there's a link there.
Yeah. Another thing that for me, you as writers have in common is just the shared appetite for big challenges. I mean, there's so many other ways that each of you could have started. You didn't have to ride across Central Asia, Tibet, and into the Himalayas. I mean, there were so many other things you could have done, and still under the rubric of exploration. And similarly, for your first novel to do something as ambitious as Astra, it's kind of so my question, that's my comment. My question is, why did you choose these projects? Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun. I don't know. Life isn't. What gives life meaning often is hardship and challenge, and I've led an incredibly privileged life, so I have to bring it on myself by launching on big bike trips in this case, and I don't know, but a big part of the joy of the trip when you experience something, but you don't really experience at the deepest level until you've let it kind of simmer in you for years. In my case, I worked on this for ages, and I know you spent a lot of time on Astra. And it takes a long time for meaning to surface, even in what you lived or what you're trying to work out in a character. I don't know. People do all kinds of crazy things with this one and only life, and this just happens to be what I'm drawn to.
In your book, while I was reading, I noticed there was a lot of references to wonder and the word wonder. And I even I wrote a couple of things down, which made me kind of nerdy. But you said at one point, it's the truth I was after, the deepest wonder, nothing less. And then you spoke later about Darwin's loss of wonder. Right. And that, what did you say? He lost his need or ability to see wonder. But then I also thought that was interesting because it does connect, I think, to writing. That in writing or you also talk about the repetitiveness of biking somewhere over and over and over, and then these moments of wonder at the end of the day when you're so tired, so hungry, so cold, and you're looking at the stars. And that was something that I noticed was a theme that repeats in Astra as well, the people who would work and they'd be toiling away, and then they'd have these moments sitting beside a friend and looking at the stars, and that exhaustion and that a sense of accomplishment. And so I was curious about your relationship to wonder now. Does wonder, I know this is a little bit off topic, but is wonder a connection to youth? And is that why people can lose it? Or how do you rekindle your wonder now?
Oh gosh. First of all, I feel there's an imbalance here in that Astra is a fictional character. My books that I read, so I feel like more of the hot seat.
I'm sorry. This is why I write fiction.
I'm gonna learn something from this. Yeah, no, absolutely. Sense of wonder is what propels this book, and it is very much a sort of coming of age story because I have a lot more sympathy for Darwin now than I did when I was judging him for, holing up in a countryside cottage and having 10 kids and narrowing his focus, basically. It's not the kids, it's the, narrowing of focus. He became obsessed with very small things, and really it's a deficit in me to not recognize there's hugeness in everything. And it's, but I was so restless as a kid, I was so judgmental and idealistic as to how I needed to live out my sense of wonder. And I thought it was in the stars, and sort of, I hope what people come to in reading this book is my growing sense that it really is everywhere, at every moment, and it's really our capacity to see it or not that is the issue. And I do think, as you get older, things happen, like loss, grief. Life is exhilaration and it's grief, and both of those things can affect how we perceive the world and wonder or its lack. Yeah. Now it's your turn. Astra.
Well, I guess that is what would draw me. You asked originally why writing this book, and for me, it's this obsession with people and how they interact. And so that was a wonderful thing to explore in Astra, because I get to enter different ages, different periods of time, different perspectives, and wonder at how their brains work and how they feel when they encounter this one common character of Astra and how that changes them. And so I'm always wondering what's inside people's minds, what they're feeling about the person sitting beside them, what they're feeling about their mother all at once. And so I got to explore that through 10 different people with her as a link. So I guess there's the search of, the wonder you can find in writing and reading too.
Yeah.
It's kind of scary when you think what the Astra of each of us is, right? How
I
everybody's
know.
relating to us.
Yeah.
The inevitable question. I mean, both of you have started with these amazing books, fiction, nonfiction. What are you working on now? And if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay. But if you do, that would be great too, because I have some related questions if you want to talk about what you're working on now.
Do you want to talk about it?
Sure. We had a funny conversation, a lovely conversation over lunch where we realized we're at a similar thought-ish in our writing. So that was kind of, there's a similarity in that where you're like trying to complete something. I think that's difficult. But I'm writing something else and I hope it works, and it's very different structurally, but again, many different voices, but more, because Astra is bite-sized pieces that you kind of follow throughout. And this is more woven together in different timelines, and so it's a bigger thing I have to hold up in my imagination at once. So
Still relatively ambitious.
well, I
On the
think
sounds of it.
all writing in some ways really is always a new problem, I think, and I'm new to it, so the problems feel huge.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Yeah, I'm deep in this project, and like you can sort of think I can see where it's going, but you never know. And I keep thinking I know where it's going, and it doesn't work. So I'm still trying to find out where it's going. But it's a travel book of sorts, but with that much. I talk about Darwin's narrowed horizons, and I'm sort of trying to force myself to see more in similarly smaller scope, both through just the life I've been lucky to live with my partner in Atlin for the last 10 years, in this tiny community, in a spectacularly beautiful place that also has its many challenges. And so it's kind of, Thoreau was famous for saying, I have traveled widely and conquered, and that's sort of one of the inspirations for this book. Like, how widely can you travel without going very far? And yeah, and I don't know how it ends yet. I don't know when it will end, but it's interesting. Do you feel differently tackling this project than you did your first book? Like, does it have a different? You've done it once. You pulled off this beautiful work of art, and how does it feel tackling the second?
Well, I had a innocence of thinking that it was never going to turn into anything. And it was something I did in secrecy. I didn't tell anybody except for my partner that I was writing for a good 2 years. I wanted to at least have a full book. And so I'd often do childcare swaps, and people would be like, what do you do during your time? And I'd be like, nothing. But I found, space to write in secrecy until I felt like, oh, this is something, and I'm gonna, show my partner, and then we'll see what happens. So it was for me, and I know that that's how a lot of people feel when they first write something. It is for themselves, and there isn't much pressure. And not that I have any pressure. I give myself full permission to fail this next time, and I try to remind myself. But still, of course, if you feel like you should be able to do it again. Well, before it didn't really matter. There was no stakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody anticipates failure in either case, but I do wonder, when you both come out with these first books, great first books, if you or the new books are somehow kind of in the shadow or intimidated by the success of those first books, or just there's some sort of feeling under pressure to do as well as you've done in each of these cases.
I mean, I was definitely blown away by the response to this book, but I also feel, I don't feel a ton of pressure. I don't know, it's not like I'm a household name, or like a very select group of readers are stoked about this book. And I'm sorry if I disappoint those readers with the next one, but I don't feel any sort of large worldly pressure on me. I just really want to write. I want to get better and better with every book, and I want to do different things with every book. I don't want to write the same book again and again, exploring the same themes and the same sort of stylish tics of how you move from one paragraph to the next, or one idea to the next. I really want to push myself to weave things together differently, and just get better and better as a writer, and try to maybe someday figure out what I'm trying to say in the process.
It doesn't sound like the first book's an issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's an issue either. I mean, it's lovely. Again, there's people what I spoke to about writing once I started to talk about it. You're like, every there's a lot of crossover with interests, but a lot of people have completely different interests. And if you follow what you love and what you care about and what you're obsessed about and what you haunts you all the time, you probably share that with a few other people. Probably. And so I just think if you follow that and try to trust it, it'll probably work out to some degree. That's what I kind of lean on. And so that's what I did with Astra. I was like, some people might find this character-driven, more quiet novel boring, but I like these people, and I like putting them together, and I like seeing how they relate, and so maybe other people will care, and that's kind of all I can do this next time as well. So
Different way of saying faith in people's interest in where you're going to go.
like, I'm interested in other people, so there must be some crossover somewhere. I want to hear people's stories. Yeah.
You talked about, I mean, both books in their way are very ideas driven. I mean, for Kate's, for a travel memoir, it's full of an awful lot of ideas, right? And similar to yours, all the ideas of all these 11 different characters is what's, for me at least, a big part of the fascination of the book. So the question is, where do those ideas, what's your inspiration, where do those ideas come from? A nice, easy question.
I think my parents ask the same thing. Where do my interests come from? I don't know. I'm definitely an obsessive type. Like, I get really into whatever it is I'm into, and not too much of a dilettante. And that those obsessions tend to last for years, if not like eras of my life. I think I'm a huge geek at heart, and I love science. I love thinking about big picture notions. I love sort of startling myself regularly with just reminding myself of where we are in the universe and how little we know. And I mean, that's what gets me excited. And I love writing as a method of exploration. And I just geek out on different ideas for a while and want to explore that.
And the new thing you're working on is a different dimension of the same thing in that sense.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a travel book that has a lot of outer space in it, I guess. Even though I'm not really going far. In part, I'm writing about the process of learning how to fly in a small plane. So that very obviously, connects the earth to the sky. But I'm really just circling again and again over this one place that I've made my home, and trying to understand it from the ground out to the deepest reaches of how we understand the universe. And that's probably the core theme running through my whole life, actually, is just being continually blown away by the mystery of being alive. Like, nobody has the faintest clue what is going on here. How are we all here now, and what does that mean, and are we alone? And we live in such an exciting era in so many ways, where we're getting further and further out into the unknown, the genuine unknown, philosophically and scientifically. I love that stuff. And there's no end to asking those kinds of questions too. So I'm sure there are many books to come where I just chew obsessively over such ideas.
I guess I just keep saying people, don't I? So science, I love science, believe in science, and terrified of those questions. One of my dad's favorite stories to tell is that he would mention how big the universe was, and I just tell him to stop talking. I found it super disorienting, and I get really scared, and I was like, I just want to know what's right here in this house. So, which is something that you talk about, I know it's just slightly off topic, when you're growing up in a semi-rural area in Ontario, and you were, I think it was like, always seeking more wildness. But your brothers were always happy, just as happy inside. And I thought that was interesting, because I grew up on Galiano Island, lived in tents while my parents built their house. It was pretty wild, somewhat wild, not as wild as Astra's life and her fictional farm, but I was fine with being inside. I, like Astra, moved to Calgary and got a job at a mall. I was like, I'm out of here. That was fine. Now I want to have a house with a shower, not just a bath. So it's interesting, this impulse to, some people want more wild and more looking at the unknown, and then some don't. And I find that an interesting comparison.
Well, I often wonder too, I think we often seek what we don't have in childhood. And it sounds like you grew up in this wild place, and so people were really fascinating to you, and books as a way of getting into people's minds, and I wonder who I would have been growing up on Galiano like you, and vice versa. Like maybe my brothers, they really were, we had the same upbringing, and they're just totally content in a much more sort of kind of domestic joys, I guess, and fascinations, and we're just not entirely. I don't mean anything. I cherish the domestic, as my partner can attest. But yeah, like who would we be if we'd grown up in different realms?
Absolutely. There's a point in your book where you talk about longing past each other. And I
Yes.
think you were in, it was nomadic
Tibet.
Tibetan family, and on the wall of their yurt was a picture of a waterfall and a burger picnic.
Yes.
And that you had just left a place that you felt like you'd just eaten at lunch or something. I'm paraphrasing, but that idea of longing past, and I guess that's maybe, it made me think about childhood, or when I was trying to connect these two books together, thinking how Astra leaves and you left behind your type of maybe upbringing too, to go explore the more wild. So that's, it made me think about why we long past each other or long into different environments.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's a motive force of a human life, like you're longing what you don't know or don't have, and often that goes with a failure to recognize what you do know and do have.
And then that usually comes as you get older again, as you start to be able to return back, as you say, the loving this close and looking at your home from the sky. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to change channels dramatically here and ask you about the mechanics of it, your writing processes, like the where and the when and that kind of stuff. Do you have to be in particular places and times, and how do you make that work? I think I kind of know the answer in each case, but I'd like to hear you talk about the mechanics of it. How do you work that discipline of writing?
Well, as you two realized, when I was terrible on email, I just kind of vanished from the world for long stints, to the chagrin of everyone. And it almost feels like this desperate measure of that's the only way I can focus. And the cabin where I live is very conducive to that, because internet access, even when you have it, is extremely slow. So it's a good excuse for not, I don't know. I think one of the problems, writers are generally really curious people, and especially when it comes to doing research for a book, there's no end to, and so the rabbit hole potential for research is endless, and I definitely have that compulsion, and so I really just I need to kind of narrow down to one task and just give it my everything for a long period of time in a chunk, and then kind of resurface and live a human life again. But that's my very flawed method, is just throw myself at it to the exclusion of everything else for long stretches, and then kind of pop back into the world and scramble and catch up on bills I haven't paid and emails I haven't answered. So I've sort of orchestrated my life around making that possible, but it's a totally different situation having kids, and yet it sounds like you carve out similar just kind of blocks of utter focus.
Yeah, when I started writing Astra, we had 2 little kids at home, and obviously there was working and living and all of the things. So I just learned to build writing into my regular life. It just had to be, I really like getting up early in the morning. And so when my kids turned into morning people, that was a real disappointment. I was like, no, you can't get up at 6. This is my time. But, so you fit it in around life, and that is a certain joy. It takes a skill. You have to be like, okay. And now both of my children are in school. We're both, able to work more regularly, but it's still fractured at short days. You have to just fit it in wherever you can around everything else. But then we are in a very amazing position too, where we built a little cabin on Galiano. So we trade off, me and my husband Mike. We trade off, and one of us will go to Galiano Island. When you're at that point where you just need to focus purely on one thing for a week, and someone will be like, you got life here, and I'm gonna go there and work, and we trade off all the time. So that's really valuable too. So I kind of have learned to write in both gears, and to find there's certain times that call for direct focus, and there's certain times where it can fit in because you're researching or reading a lot, or it's more, yeah.
And you know what you can do where.
Yeah, and it doesn't always line up. Like, you can't always have the right thing at the right time, and there's always that frustration, but you just learn to work around it.
I have two very specific questions, and now they're not generic for each of you, they're one for each of you, if I can.
Okay.
One is your Astra's childhood. A lot of old-timers here on Denman, recognize dementia. Again, it wasn't as extreme necessarily, although probably more extreme here than on Galiano, or getting closer to the situation she was in the Caribou. But the question really is, how much of that is from your own childhood experience on Galiano? How much are you drawing on that?
A bit. I mean, I made Astra 10 years older than me, so she's born in 1970, I was born in 1980. I moved to Galiano. Wasn't born there. I have many friends who were born on island and had lived there. Their parents had got there through living on communes on Galiano, and then those kind of broke apart and they stayed forever. I was the new kid, the new city kid when I arrived at 8, even though we didn't have power and we lived in tents too, but still I was the city kid. But it fascinated me, all these different types of kind of more unconventional childhoods, and they were all so different. And Galiano was even the big city to some kids who would come from the north, and then their parents would be like, okay, we need to put these kids in school. They'd come to Galiano. So there was like true Baptist blenders who would come down to Galiano to live like a populous life or whatever, I don't know. But so it always interested me, people who'd grown up, where they went afterwards, what sort of guidance they had, just the effects of more of an unconventional small town. So just it was an interest, but everything in Astra is totally fictional and Celestial is fictional. I just wanted to explore it more.
But you had some more to it. And we kind of a related question I asked you is the people, but I won't name them all, but Astra yourself, Clodagh, Dom, Hugo, there's Doris, there's some compelling characters, and to what extent are those from your own canon?
Yeah, I feel like no character is built on somebody I knew, but each character is probably built on 8 people I knew, and then who they became after I got to know them over years and years and years of rewriting their stories. But like Doris, you mentioned, she is one of my favorite characters in the book, and I have had many Dorises in my life, though they weren't exactly Doris, but they were very similar. Same with Brendan at the mall. I knew many guys like him too, but not him specifically. That was a completely original story. But yeah, so just kind of creating characters out of a collage of characters and then rewriting it all and imagining it all, I guess.
Thank you. That one is clawing away at me. I have a similarly one that's gnawing at me, Kate, if you don't mind. In my childhood, 100 years ago, I cycled lots to but never somewhere like you went. I mean, I did in North America a year ago. And so my question is, the first part of it, at least, is how did you decide on that kind of route? Like, I can totally relate to your love of bicycle. One of my favorite parts of the book is when you're waxing lyrical about the joy of riding a bicycle. I do too, but how can you enjoy riding your bicycles through, the ROC Basin in Uzbekistan, or the Terai and Nepal, or that adjacent part of northern India, a million trucks and buses going by all the time. How did you choose those routes?
I did regret the busy part of India. That was just, I feared for my life every other. And Mel's, I'd be watching my friend biking ahead of me, and just, like, yeah, so many close calls of Tata trucks, like horns blaring. For the most part, we honestly tried to avoid busy roads and centers. You just can't avoid it at certain points. Marco Polo dictated the route. The Silk Road is many different roads or many branches, but we sort of tried to follow the safest through line that was kind of loyal to where Polo went, and so that kind of dictated which stands and countries. And there were many parts of the trip. I'm pretty honest about suffering on the trip, but obviously it's a chosen suffering. I brought it on myself, as Mel reminds me at various points, and on her. But yeah, I'm just so grateful to have gotten to see the world in that way. And when you travel by bicycle, whether it's in the U.S. or Europe or anywhere, people perceive you differently. You're not just a tourist piling off a tourist bus. You're an oddity, and I think that instantly creates a possibility for connections that doesn't exist otherwise. So, ironically, I set off biking in search of wildness, this elusive, strange quality, and really what I remember about the trip over and over again was incredible kindness of people all along the route, and that's what sticks with me. And maybe that was part of what, bringing me back to earth in a way. Humanity is so easy to dismiss in one sweeping word, but there's so many incredible people out there. Listening to the kindness talk earlier was really powerful and also I think that idea of the way you approach the world is the world you get in a lot of ways. And obviously there are exceptions, or there are terrible people doing terrible things out there, but for the most part people are kind and welcoming and can look across all the differences that are highlighted in the news all the time and just see a person and bring it into their home.
Yeah, the human dimension all the way along is the nicest part of the travel that you describe in many ways, but yeah, I'm a little bit obsessed with the Black Sea coast of Turkey in the pouring rain, or the
regrettable choices.
Yes,
basically.
These passes. At that altitude, I can barely breathe or think, or you can't digest. How could you cycle at that altitude?
People live up there. It's slow acclimatization, and you're just fine.
That's it. You're just going up gradually.
Yeah,
Oh.
absolutely. Like if we sort of, and people flying into Lhasa or people flying into Denver suffer altitude sickness.
Yes.
But if you bike there, you'll be fine. You just sort
You
of
go gradually.
get up on the plateau slowly. And,
Questions? No, I get it. I think we're obliged to wrap it up, but again, I remind everybody that we have solo sessions tomorrow at 10:40, I think. I got it right, I'm pretty sure it's 10:40. It's on my other piece of paper, but tomorrow morning. And yours is on Sunday morning, 11 o'clock. It's not just a solo reading session, there's going to be slides.
yes, there are photos to fact check the book. And I've got a video as well.
Amazing.
And both books, thanks to Abraxas Books.